micro spikes, tent stakes, camping stoves, and trekking poles. What's so common among all of these items? Literally nobody knows if they're allowed on planes or not. And I'm not even exaggerating, because a lot of the times even the airport security officers won't give you an exact answer. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to make here is that traveling with hiking gear is difficult because a lot of it is in the gray area where the rules aren't 100% certain. But fear not, because in this video I'm going to be breaking down literally everything. Which gear is allowed in which type of luggage, how to prepare your backpack so that it doesn't get damaged or lost, as well as many other tips about traveling with hiking gear. If you've traveled a lot before, feel free to skip this section, but if not, here are the basics of traveling with luggage. Hand luggage is all of the luggage that you can take with you in person on the flight. It has to go through airport security and is divided into two main groups: personal items and carry-ons. Personal items are the smallest type of luggage and they're usually about this large. They have to be stowed underneath the seat in front of you. They're usually included in the ticket price for free, and the exact weight and size requirements usually vary a lot between different airlines. Carry-ons are the second type of luggage. They're usually about this large, and when on the airplane you have to store them in the overhead lockers instead of underneath the seat. Most airlines will allow you to bring one carry-on for free on the flight, but some budget airlines will charge you a small fee for bringing a carry-on. The exact weight and size requirements for carry-ons vary a lot between different airlines, but these are the most common ones. And the last type of luggage is checked luggage, which you hand over at the check-in desks before you go through airport security, and it's stored at the airplane in the compartments where nobody is sitting together with other checked bags. Usually you have to pay a 20 to 60 euro fee for each checked bag, and they have to be under these size and weight requirements. In theory, you can use any type of bag as your checked luggage or as your hand luggage, as long as it's within the required size and weight requirements, whether that's a suitcase, a backpack, or anything else. The rules on which items are allowed in your hand luggage and checked luggage can vary a bit between different airports, airlines, and countries, but for the most part they are very similar all across the world. If you're trying to understand whether an item is allowed or not in hand luggage or checked bag, one tip is to go on TSA's website, which is the main airport security for the United States, because they have the best website for searching this. One thing that you should most definitely figure out before you reach a hiking destination in another country is internet, and that's where today's sponsor comes in, Saily. Saily is a travel eSIM, which basically means it's an app on your phone that gives you a good internet connection in most parts of the world. To be specific, it works in over 200 different countries. So how it works is you first need to download the Saily app on your phone while you're still home, then select a country or region where you'll be traveling to, for example Europe, then select a plan based on how much data you usually use during your travels, and then finish setting up the eSIM. Then when you reach your destination and turn on the internet, the Saily eSIM will activate automatically and you'll have a working internet connection. You won't need to look for any local SIM cards, it will all just work without any additional steps. One thing that I like about the Saily eSIM specifically is that it has a built-in ad blocker, which means that when you open up anything on the browser on your phone, it stops all the ads from loading, which on average saves about 28% of your data. They also notify you once you spend 80% of your internet, which is always a good thing because it means that you won't run out of the internet at a bad moment. And the good news is that by using this QR code and entering the code OscarHikes at checkout, you'll get 15% off Saily data plans. Download Saily today to be prepared for your next hiking adventure. But now let's get back to the video. I would put hiking gear into two main categories, ones with very clear and defined rules and the other group with less defined rules, which sometimes might be allowed and sometimes not. So let's start with the first group that has very clear and defined rules. These items are banned from all types of luggage, whether that's a checked bag or hand luggage. The first item on this list is flammable liquids, solids, and gases. And when we're talking about hiking, two items fall under this category. The first one is butane gas canisters, and the second one is alcohol for alcohol camping stoves. Whenever I reach a destination where I'm going to be hiking, the first thing that I do is find an outdoor store that sells one of these, because these things are totally banned from airplanes. Also remember that on your return flight, you're going to need to get rid of this because you can't fly it back home. So essentially you have three options to choose from. First one is that you can find a campsite on the trail within one of the last days and you can just leave it there for somebody else to use later. The second one is to simply find another hiker and ask if they're going to need this. And the third option is to screw on the camping stove to burn out all of the gas so that this thing is empty and just leave it near a trash bin. Another big no-no is bear sprays and pepper sprays. And also make sure to read up on the rules where you're traveling to, because in a lot of countries, pepper sprays are actually classified as weapons and you need a permit to carry one. Another big no-no is a satellite communicator device like the Garmin InReach Mini, but only to certain destinations. Currently, a list of countries which have banned these things are India, Thailand, Vietnam, China, Georgia, Afghanistan, Cuba, and Russia. These countries have banned these things because of security reasons, because they use a different satellite network other to the one that this thing uses, so it's considered to be a potential security breach. And you can get into very, very big trouble for this. There have even been cases where some hikers have actually been arrested because they didn't know that these things are banned in these countries. And the last item on this list, which is another big no-no that's banned from all types of luggage, is rocks, if you believe it or not. So the thing with rocks, especially with very interesting rocks, is that they might contain fossils inside of them. And a lot of countries ban private individuals from picking up fossils from the ground and keeping it for themselves. You can actually get a very big fine for this. As an example, my father came here to visit me here in Italy. He picked up some cool rocks, and on the way back in the main airport of Rome, he was pulled aside and questioned. The airport security looked at each rock individually to see if it has any fossils inside, and they told him that he would be fined upwards of 3,000 euros. Luckily, he didn't have any fossils inside of it, so he was good to go, but these rules exist in many, many different countries, so in general, I would just advise you to not pick up any cool rocks and don't travel back with them. The next group are items that are banned from hand luggage and that are only allowed in checked bags. The first one is anything that's sharp and could be used as a weapon during the flight, which includes knives, pocket knives, and multi-tools with blades. And while we're talking about knives, you should also read up on the rules of knives to the country where you'll be traveling to, because some countries consider knives with concealed blades or knives with fixed blades with long enough length to be completely illegal, and you could get into very big trouble for that. So what I recommend you to do instead is to carry a small pocket knife, because this thing is allowed pretty much anywhere across the world and you'll never get into trouble for using a pocket knife. Another thing that's banned from hand luggage is liquids, pastes, and creams over 100 milliliters in size. Although this is definitely changing, and some more modern airports now allow you to bring liquids larger than 100 milliliters. But anyway, this probably doesn't bother you too much, because if you're going to be hiking, you're probably not going to be bringing containers this large. And lastly, this one is more relevant for people who are doing mountaineering. Ice axes and ice picks are also completely banned from hand luggage. The third group is items that are only allowed in hand luggage and that are completely banned from checked bags. The first group is some flammables, which include safety matches, lighters, and fire starter rods. The rules for these are a bit different for each country, but usually each person is allowed to bring one of these, and you have to bring them in your hand luggage instead of your checked bag. And the second group that you cannot pack in your checked bags is any electronics that are larger than a cell phone, and also power banks and any spare batteries. For example, these ones are for my spare camera. And then we have another very big group of hiking gear that I would consider to be in the gray area, which sometimes might be allowed and sometimes not, which honestly depends a lot on your luck. By the way, it's also worth noting here that the airline employees at the check-in desks and also the airline security officers always have the final say on which item is allowed and which isn't. So unfortunately, if you encounter an officer that's very strict or who's having just a bad day, unfortunately he can prohibit you from bringing a certain item if he feels like it, even though you have traveled with that item hundreds of other times before without any problems. Anyway, the first item that's in the gray area is gas-powered and alcohol camping stoves. That's because there is a rule which prohibits you from bringing any type of item which has any residue of any flammable liquid. So if this thing smells like propane, they can in theory prohibit you from bringing this. That's why before I set up, I always make sure to open the gas camping stove and air it out at least for a few hours so that it doesn't smell like gas anymore. The same thing goes for alcohol stoves. Make sure to air them out so that they don't smell like alcohol. There are also some items which are sometimes prohibited from hand luggage because they're either too sharp or they could be used as a blunt force weapon. These include tent stakes because they're sometimes a bit sharp, micro spikes, same thing, they're also a bit sharp, and also trekking poles, which also are sharp and can be used as a blunt force weapon. Sometimes they're allowed, sometimes not. It depends on your luck. I would recommend packing these three items in your checked bag. And lastly, there's a few other pieces of hiking gear that you'll probably be allowed to bring on your hand luggage. It's just that they look a bit weird on the scanner, so you'll most likely need to take them out of your bag and show them to the TSA officer. These include hand warmers, titanium pots, tripods, foldable camping chairs, tent poles, and sometimes titanium sporks as well. You can probably pack these in your hand luggage, but I would recommend you to keep them somewhere accessible in case you need to take them out quickly. All right, and now the million-dollar question. Do you check yourself before you wreck yourself? Wait, that's not what I wrote. Oh, do you check your backpack or do you use it as your hand luggage? That makes more sense. Personally, I think it's a no-brainer. I always check in my backpack. First of all, most backpacks have to be checked in because they're too large to be used as a carry-on unless you're rocking a really ultralight setup. Secondly, there are a lot of things that are outright banned from hand luggage or in the gray area, which could be pocket knives, trekking poles, tent stakes, micro spikes, ice axes, and so on. This would mean that if I wouldn't have a checked bag, I would need to buy my tent stakes, my trekking poles, and my pocket knife when I arrive. And I think it's just too complicated and also too expensive. And lastly, checked bags aren't actually that expensive. Of course, you need to pay an extra fee, but it isn't that large. I would only consider using my backpack as a carry-on on a very short hiking trip where I wouldn't stay in a tent, where I wouldn't need a pocket knife or trekking poles. But in all other cases, I'm definitely checking in my backpack. So first of all, when preparing a backpack for checking it in, you need to remove all of the electronics, such as a headlamp, spare batteries for your camera, and a power bank. And you need to put all of them in your personal item or the carry-on. And also, while we're talking about electronics, make sure that the headlamp is locked because you can accidentally turn it on and then realize later that it's out of battery, which always sucks. You also need to remove any other items that are banned from checked luggage, such as safety matches, lighters, and fire starter rods. Personally, whenever I'm traveling for hiking, I almost never bring a carry-on. I just have a check bag and a personal item. As the personal item, you have several options to choose from. First of all, you could bring a fanny pack. This one is a pretty large one for all of my camera gear. Or if you want something bigger, you could use an extra dry sack, such as this one. And the third option is to buy a cheap foldable backpack that's right in the size of a personal item. This one is 10 liters, for example. Personally, I've used all three of them as my personal items on separate occasions, and I've never had any problems. They were always within the size and weight limits. The second thing worth mentioning here is that you probably don't need a check bag for every person if you're traveling in a group. For example, when I'm traveling with my wife, we usually have only one check bag that's pretty much overfilled to the brim with both of our gear, and if anything doesn't fit inside, we usually put it in our personal items. And that way we can just save a bit on checked luggage fees. When preparing a backpack for checking it in, first of all, make sure that all of the zippers are closed, and then also make sure that all of the straps are tightened. Another thing that I usually do is I loosen the shoulder straps and the hip belt, and then I close it off on the other side, on the front side, and then if there are still any loose straps, I try to hide them underneath some other elements so that there aren't a lot of loose straps on the backpack. You need to do all of these things because when you're checking in your backpack, it's transferred across many different conveyor belts, luggage carts, and so on. And if it has any loose straps, it's more likely to get caught up underneath some other elements, which could increase the chances of your backpack getting lost, delayed, or even damaged. Honestly, I've always checked my backpack in like this, and I've never had any problems. However, this definitely isn't perfect. Ideally, you want to have some kind of cover over the backpack as well to keep all the loose straps from getting caught up into other elements. Some people recommend using a reusable pack duffel or simply wrapping the whole backpack in plastic wrap. But I found some other people recommending another technique, which I think is even better, and I'm going to be using the next time when I'm checking in my backpack. You simply need one trash bag for this, where you put in your backpack and then close it, and then wrap it all around with some packing tape. Just make sure to leave the top part open where the handle is so that the luggage handlers have an easier way of picking it up and so that there is some space to attach the label to. Unfortunately, checked luggage can and sometimes does get lost or delayed. Luckily, the chances of that happening are pretty small, less than 1% according to some statistics. However, that does happen from time to time. One way to avoid this from happening is to avoid any flights with layovers, because that's where luggage usually gets lost and delayed. So ideally, for your hiking trips, only try to book direct flights. One thing that can really help with speeding up the process of finding lost luggage is luggage tags. That's because what sometimes can happen is that this label that's attached to the handle of the backpack can sometimes fall off, because after all, it's just a sticker. If you have a luggage tag on your backpack that has your contact details as well as your name and surname, then it increases the chances of your lost luggage getting found more quickly. When booking flights for hiking trips, I would always recommend you to book a flexible return flight so that you can cancel or change your return date if necessary. Not only could your luggage get lost, but you could also become sick, you could develop an injury, or simply walk at a slower pace than expected, and you might need to change the return date. Or you could simply not buy the return flight and then buy it sometime later when you're closer to ending the hike. Another tip is that if you don't want to check in your backpack, there's one other thing that you can do, is to simply send all of your gear with mail ahead of time so that when you arrive, you can go to a post office and pick up all of your gear ready to go. I personally haven't done this, but I know that some hikers do. It's pretty much the same thing as sending a resupply box ahead of time. And my last tip is that If you need to buy some gear before the hike, consider doing it when you arrive at your destination country. Sometimes it might even be cheaper to buy it there. For example, if you're traveling to a less developed country like Nepal, there's a lot of cheap and good gear over there. Anyway, I hope this video was useful to you. If it was, please subscribe and I'll see you in one of my next videos. Bye!